In the year 2006, in Yekaterinburg, a woman arrived to retrieve her 5-year-old daughter from her friend, but no one opened the door for her. Several days later, the apartment was forcibly opened with the assistance of law enforcement. What the law enforcement officers and the woman witnessed was an unforgettable scene. Every meter became a site of gruesome violence. 3 bodies were discovered in the apartment, those of Svetlana Fursova, her 3-year-old daughter Yana, and 5-year-old Daria Ovechkina. It was determined that all 3 had been subjected to abuse during their lives, followed by ultimate brutality. Never before had the personnel of criminal investigation encountered such cruelty. This crime became the most heinous in history, lasting over 9 years as the perpetrator eluded capture. Throughout these years, the assailant traveled across the country, relentlessly inflicting cruelty upon women. The maniac in question was referred to as the Turel Chikatilo, the UFO Chikatilo, or simply the Chernikov maniac. Why couldn't law enforcement apprehend the criminal for over 9 years, and why was he able to mock the investigation? The media dubbed him the Black Lodger. In Orenburg in 2006, a woman who rented out her apartment started to worry as her tenants had not been in contact for over 10 days. Upon arriving at the address, she was met with an unpleasant odor at the door. No one answered the door. Using her own key to enter the apartment, she found nothing suspicious in the rooms, only a horrifying mess. Marina Nikishina decided to check the bathroom and nearly lost consciousness. In the fully filled bathtub lay the body of a gagged girl. Investigators immediately established that the victim did not die by her own hand. Signs of violence were found on her body. Subsequently, experts confirmed that the girl had been abused. The cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation. The unknown victim had been strangled. The girl had died a week before her discovery. The apartment owner was interviewed, and the woman revealed that she had rented the apartment to a solitary man who, at the time of the tragedy, had disappeared without a trace. Maria Nikishina recounted that the man had responded to her advertisement, introducing himself as Oleg Losov from Chelyabinsk, claiming to have come for work. He mentioned being a carpenter. The suspect rented the apartment for 2 months but left, according to neighbors, after just 3 days. 2 versions were considered. Either the lodger was also a victim, or he was the perpetrator. Law enforcement began searching for a certain Oleg Losov, aged 30 to 35, from Chelyabinsk, in their database. However, no such person existed. Based on investigators' experience, inaccurate data pointed to the possibility that criminals were itinerant offenders who moved from city to city committing crimes. Yet the landlady remembered the face of the lodger, and detectives managed to create a composite sketch. Meanwhile, investigators tried to ascertain the identity of the deceased girl. After checking all missing person reports, no matches were found. The victim did not fit any descriptions. The search expanded. Everyone who reported missing women in the past few weeks was invited to identify the victim's belongings. Several dozen people came for identification. Eventually, luck smiled upon the investigators. One man recognized his wife's bracelet. They had bought it together 2 years ago on vacation, and she never took it off since. But this was not the only coincidence. The man later identified his wife by her clothing and a graphic facial reconstruction. The victim was identified. The husband was immediately questioned. He revealed that on April 1, the couple had quarreled, and his wife went out for a walk. He never saw her again, and a few hours later, she was found lifeless. What happened on that day? And who committed such a heinous crime? What was particularly strange was the absence of any male fingerprints in the apartment. It seemed the criminal meticulously wiped all items he touched. However, he made a mistake. No fingerprints were found throughout the apartment, but detectives discovered a bottle of alcohol and plastic cups in the trash, which retained fingerprints. Running them through the database, law enforcement made a horrifying discovery. A maniac had visited the city, eluding capture for over 5 years throughout Russia. A certain Oleg Anatolievich Zaykin, born in 1982, emerged as the prime suspect, with the majority of his crimes involving acts of violence. In the course of his assaults, He earned the moniker Ural Chikatilo, as Zaykin attempted to surpass even the bloodiest maniacs. Oleg's monstrous cruelty and cynicism became his distinctive signature. All his crimes were committed with a maniacal thirst for retribution. Thus, Orenburg investigators received detailed information: a scar on the left arm, the absence of a phalanx on the ring finger of the right hand, appearing to be a carpenter. Another distinctive feature of Oleg was that after each crime, even in different cities, he altered his appearance, growing hair on his head or face, only to abruptly shave it off. Everyone who might have seen the criminal in the city was questioned: railway ticket sellers, international bus drivers. Initially, there was no information, but later, a crucial witness was identified: a taxi driver. The man recounted that his client was very talkative, introducing himself as a carpenter. He mentioned being in Orenburg briefly before heading to Ufa. Local investigators were immediately alerted through television and newspapers that a maniac who had eluded capture for a long time was headed their way. But how do you catch a criminal who consistently evades the investigation? Oleg Zaykin was born in 1982 in Buryachia, in the settlement of Zagrevo, 65 kilometers from Ulenud. The family was well-off and hardworking. The father worked at a factory, and the mother was a schoolteacher. Childhood passed peacefully. No one humiliated or offended him. However, his character gradually revealed itself. Zaykin became introverted, rarely socializing, often stealing, and later crossing various boundaries, including arson. His academic pursuits faltered, and due to poor grades, he remained in the second year. Nevertheless, he had a fascination with radio engineering. When Zaykin was 12 years old, he resolved to acquire a necessary component. He could think of nothing better than pilfering a tape recorder from his neighbor. His transgression was exposed, leading to his registration in the juvenile department of the police, necessitating his father's vigilant attention and accompanying him to evening school. At the age of 20, Zaykin enlisted in the army, where he allegedly attempted self-harm due to the mistreatment by his comrades. However, this claim was never substantiated. The problematic soldier was discharged and sent home. This proved to be a grave error by those responsible for Zaykin's well-being, as his aggression began to manifest. According to his subsequent confessions, he started deriving pleasure from tormenting others. One day, Oleg vented all his malice on a girlfriend, cruelly abusing her, and he found an unusual satisfaction in the act. From then on, Zaykin subjected every lover to unimaginable torment. After the army, his father managed to secure him a position at a factory where he had worked for most of his life. However, Zaykin, along with his accomplices, perpetrated a major theft of components at his new workplace. This event deeply affected the elder Zaykin, who couldn't cope and took his own life before his son faced trial. The younger Zaykin was under travel restrictions at the time, but following his father's demise, decided to flee his native settlement. Henceforth, Oleg lived under false documents, constantly fearing law enforcement, earning his livelihood solely through theft. A year into this life, he committed his first act of violence. This occurred in 2001 in Chelyabinsk when Dina Kruglova's lifeless body was discovered in his apartment. Later investigations revealed that she and Oleg were cohabiting. During a sexual encounter with his acquaintance, Zaykin inadvertently took her life. Unable to face the consequences, he fled the city. Thus began Oleg's criminal spree, involving burglaries, assaults, and violent acts. After the discovery of a victim in Chelyabinsk in 2006, investigators were convinced that the maniac would head to Ufa. However, on October 12, Zaykin committed a triple homicide in the Ordzhonikidzetski district along Kosmonautov Avenue in Yekaterinburg. Subsequent to this crime, local investigators, following the evidence, closed in on Oleg. The cunning maniac intentionally sought to confound the investigation. Realizing that detectives would suspect the taxi driver, he sent them to the capital of Bashkortostan, while he headed to Yekaterinburg. On October 12, 2006, Elena Ovechkina came to her friend's home, where she had left her 5-year-old daughter Daria while she was on a business trip. Approaching the apartment, she found no one responding. Despite her distress, the police offered little help. For several days, Elena circled the apartment, unable to gain access. On the third day, the police, with their assistance, finally opened the apartment. What law enforcement and Elena witnessed inside would forever remain etched in their memories. Every inch became a scene of brutal carnage. 3 bodies were discovered: Svetlana Fursova, her 3-year-old daughter Yana, and 5-year-old Daria Ovichkina. It was determined that all 3 had been violated while alive and then brutally murdered. The savagery of this case was unprecedented for the criminal investigation team. Later, it was revealed that all the family's savings, amounting to around 45,000 rubles, had disappeared from the house. Investigators began questioning neighbors, as it seemed implausible that such a violent incident could occur without anyone hearing anything. One acquaintance mentioned that lately Svetlana had been frequently communicating with a certain Oleg Zinoviev, who rented an apartment in the same building. According to neighbors, Oleg often shouted under Svetlana's window, requesting entry into the building since he lacked an intercom in his apartment. Svetlana let him in, and on the night of the tragedy, according to investigators' assumptions, he was the last person to see all 3 victims alive. However, attempts to speak with the mysterious man proved futile. He had vanished. Not a single fingerprint was found in his apartment. Subsequently, investigators concluded that this was the elusive maniac. In the city, Oleg Zaykin committed several dozen more crimes. He would break into ground-floor apartments, stealing the most valuable items. His last acts of violence were committed in Kazan, Ulan-Ude, and Orenburg. The criminal exclusively used automotive transport to move around, as he could be recognized at train stations in every new city. Before each act, Oleg would tape his fingers to avoid leaving fingerprints. From Ufa, there were reports of a series of apartment thefts in various districts, yet no fingerprints were found. Over 2 nights, more than a dozen thefts occurred in one district, with each apartment having traces of tape on windowsills and doorknobs. However, after 2 days, the maniac changed his tactics, leaving tape marks only at the window. What could this signify? As it turned out, the thief didn't enter the apartments, but with the help of improvised tools, pulled out items. Typically, these were long branches from trees. Soon after, a violent robbery took place. In one of the districts, a marital couple was returning home from the cinema. The gentleman decided to step into a store, while the lady went to wait for him by the entrance. On her way home, she found herself trailed by a tall, robust man wielding a large hunting knife. The victim screamed. Fortunately, her spouse was already emerging from the store and heard the cry for help. The assailant promptly vanished. The terrified woman could scarcely provide a description of the assailant. She could only recall that the criminal was tall, powerful, attired in a black jacket. The victim only managed to remember one detail. The hand holding the knife lacked a phalanx on the finger. Detectives deduced that Oleg Zaykin had relocated to Ufa. Suspecting the suspect, an orientation was dispatched throughout the city, coupled with a reward for his capture. Urgent information confirmed that the maniac had indeed moved to Ufa. On the evening of November 24, the criminal assaulted 13-year-old Irina Krasnobaeva. The girl fiercely resisted, and the assailant began to inflict knife blows upon her. Passers-by rushed to her aid upon hearing her cries, compelling the assailant to flee. The girl sustained 9 stab wounds and was promptly transported to the hospital. Doctors fiercely battled for Irina's life for several days, an experience unprecedented for the pediatric hospital staff. A complex operation extended over several hours. Throughout this time, Irina's parents fervently hoped for a miracle beyond the operating room door. In the morning, the physicians emerged and informed the parents, "Your daughter lives. Her condition has stabilized." News of the maniac assaulting a child quickly spread throughout the city. Investigators realized that the criminal would promptly attempt to leave the city. Therefore, an immediate interception plan was declared. Patrols were intensified. Hundreds of vehicles were inspected. And in the meantime, the criminal burglarized 3 more apartments. Law enforcement was shocked by the audacity of the criminal. The entire city sought him out, yet he didn't cease his criminal activities. The maniac featured daily in the news, and all local newspapers published his photo. Investigators couldn't comprehend how the criminal managed to remain unnoticed, and it seemed that fortune had favored the detectives. A woman, a seller at one of the local gas stations, called the police. She reported seeing a man resembling Oleg Zaykin. The woman recognized him while he was purchasing cigarettes. The man extended his hand to pay for the purchase, and the vendor noticed the absence of a phalanx on his ring finger. The witness also remembered that the suspicious man got into a differently colored van, driven by a woman. The initial priority was not to apprehend the criminal, but to rescue the unsuspecting woman in mortal danger. All posts were instructed not to halt the vehicle, but only to report its movements. A special team set out for the arrest. In all briefings, it was mentioned that the criminal was armed. However, when the vehicle was blocked and stopped, only a frightened woman was found inside. She explained how one of the most wanted criminals ended up in her car and where he had disappeared to. The woman had met him several months before the trip. They were supposed to go to his home in another city, but on the way, Oleg abruptly changed his mind and provided a different address. He himself mentioned that they were now heading to a friend's dacha. Maria Mishova, who had known the criminal for several months, never thought that her partner resembled the wanted man in the news and newspapers. However, on the way to the friend's place, she decided that she did not want to go to unfamiliar people and refused. At that moment, Oleg drew a knife and pressed it to her throat. From the criminal's gaze, the woman understood that he would unhesitatingly end her life. Frightened, Maria was ready to go wherever the passenger instructed. Along the way, the criminal noticed surveillance, so he demanded to drive into the woods and then proceed further. When Maria stopped the car, he dashed into the forest while the woman continued driving. Investigators decided to focus on nearby settlements. The criminal couldn't have gone far. After several hours of searching in almost complete darkness, detectives realized that Zaykin had once again managed to evade pursuit. Now the case had become more complicated, as the criminal knew that investigators were hot on his trail, so everyone was convinced that he would go into hiding. However, the maniac didn't even consider it. A couple of days later, another assault occurred. A few days after that, an attempted homicide took place. Investigators were certain that the next time, the maniac would undoubtedly commit a murder. A genuine panic was spreading in the city. Streets became deserted during the dark hours, apartments were secured with multiple locks, and windows were reinforced with sticks. Children were not allowed outside unaccompanied. A day after the first attack, the maniac embarked on another audacious crime. He infiltrated an apartment on the ground floor where two women were present. The maniac subjected them to abuse, but refrained from taking lives, as the victims made efforts not to scream or resist. The maniac gathered all valuables and simply exited through the door. The women were so shocked by what had transpired that they failed to remember the appearance or distinctive features of the assailant, only recalling the enormous knife. Investigators understood that this crime was the work of Oleg Zaykin. The police faced immense pressure from the public. Local residents accused them of inaction and demanded the capture of the maniac casually strolling the city streets. The entire law enforcement apparatus of the city meticulously scrutinized every man on the street, yet results remained elusive. Finally, after years of futile attempts, they succeeded in apprehending the criminal. One of the residents of Kremlin Street took notice of a new neighbor. Olizia Makina recounted that a stranger once rang her doorbell, holding $100 in hand. The neighbor claimed that exchange offices were already closed, and he needed to buy groceries. He began inquiring about the woman's cohabitants and questioned why her husband didn't answer the door. Such queries appeared suspicious to her, as did the $100 from a neighbor who was unemployed. Olizia observed that the suspicious man never left his apartment during the day, only venturing out at night for a couple of hours. Later, the woman saw a wanted poster for Zaykin in a local store. Olizia urgently rushed home to call the police. By the time she had alerted the operatives, she witnessed through her window as Zaykin entered the apartment accompanied by a woman. Olizia called the police again, urging them to hasten, as a life hung in the balance. 2 police cars arrived at the entrance. 2 officers stationed themselves by the entrance and beneath the criminal's window, while 3 ascended to the apartment. Immediate action was necessary, as Oleg could have taken the woman hostage. Since the house was aged, law enforcement effortlessly picked the lock of the apartment. Upon entering, they subdued Oleg. He offered no resistance, stunned that they had come for him. On the table lay the very knife he had used to attack the women. His guest was oblivious, thanks to the vigilant neighbor, to the potential horror that could have transpired. And so, after 9 years of the maniac's bloody odyssey, a conclusion was reached. Following the apprehension of the criminal, Olesya, who aided in capturing the maniac, received a reward. Whether it was a fitting remuneration for apprehending such a dangerous criminal is for you to judge. The young women allocated 50,000 rubles and an additional 10,000 in gifts. They bestowed a new palace, a culinary processor, and a new DVD player. During questioning, Oleg admitted to 6 murders in Yekaterinburg, Tyumen, Chelyabinsk, and other cities. He also claimed that upon arriving in a new city, he intended to lead a peaceful life, but consistently succumbed to his impulses and sought out victims. In total, Zaykin traveled through 7 regions of Russia and committed over 100 crimes, including thefts, robberies, molestations, and murders. As investigators later discovered, 9 people perished at his hands. 3 managed to survive. During interrogations, the maniac vividly reconstructed the details of each crime. "I remember every one of my victims," he would say. The maniac elaborated on what he did to a 13-year-old girl and how he deprived women of their lives. Investigators were not surprised that the girls seemingly willingly fell into the hands of the maniac. Oleg possessed the ability to establish rapport with almost anyone. Many investigators who worked with the maniac recount how he so earnestly endeavored to win their sympathy that they found themselves expressing pity toward him. Throughout Russia, he committed more than 100 crimes. Oleg also began divulging previously unknown atrocities. The maniac recalled how, in Yekaterinburg, he took the life of a young man with a screwdriver thrust into the heart. Zaykin had met the youth through an advertisement for a laptop sale, but lacking funds, he decided to acquire it for free. He also spoke of drinking with his elderly neighbor and waking up to find her lifeless body beside him. On November 18, 2006, the maniac marked his 34th birthday in a hotel on Dostoevsky Street in Ufa. 2 days later, he took his own life in a solitary cell, leaving a note, "I don't want to spend the remainder of my life in prison." Due to the cumulative nature of his crimes, Oleg Zaykin faced potential lifelong imprisonment. The criminal case was closed on December 30, 2006, due to the death of the accused.